They all left, one by one, like shadows fading at sunrise. Not with a scream, not with a goodbye, just silence and a door that never closed gently. But I stayed through the chaos, through the storms. When everything fell apart, I was the one holding the pieces, even as they cut my hands, even as the weight crushed my spine. I stayed, not because I was weak, but because I thought love meant loyalty, because I believed that real ones don't run, because I thought someone had to care, even if it was just me. You see, I didn't need much, not applause, not praise, just honesty, just effort, just anything real. But they didn't know how to give real. They only knew how to take my time, take my peace, take my soul, and then act like I was the problem when I finally started to bleed. They used my strength until they called it control. They fed on my softness until they choked on it. And then they left, because staying meant facing what they'd done. But I stayed, even when I felt invisible, even when the silence screamed louder than their love ever did. I stayed when it wasn't easy, when it wasn't fair, when it damn near killed me. And they still called me too much, too intense, too emotional, too loyal, too loyal. Let me tell you something, loyalty isn't weakness. It's warfare. It's the kind of battle only the real ones survive. I gave them everything I never had, because I didn't want them to feel what I felt, alone, forgotten, replaceable. But now I know. They were never worthy of the war I fought for them. They were never built to stay. They were tourists in my storm, fascinated by the thunder, but never ready for the flood. Still, I stayed, even when my own reflection started to look like a ghost. But ghosts don't cry. They haunt. They remember. And now, so do I. Because being the one who stayed doesn't make me broken. It makes me dangerous. I was the anchor, the fire, the one who held it all together while they let it all fall apart. And now that I've stopped holding, let's see how long they last in the wreckage they created. They say you're too much, too intense, too emotional, too real. But what they never say is what they did to make you that way. They carved pieces out of you, then complained that you were hollow. They asked for your soul in whispers, then screamed. When you offered your truth, they reached into your chest, tore out the heart that beat for them, and when you bled, when you collapsed under the weight of your own loyalty, they looked at you like you were the problem, like you asked for this pain, like you enjoyed being broken. They took your warmth, then mocked you for the fire it left behind. They drank from your light, then cursed you when you went dim. You gave them honesty. They called it weakness. You gave them consistency. They called it obsession. You gave them love. And they handed you a knife with a smile, and still you stayed. Still you forgave. Still you tried to explain your bleeding heart to people who only speak in wounds. But they don't want explanations. They want submission. They want you quiet, numb, gone. Because if they can't break you, they have to silence you. If they can't control you, they'll convince the world you're unstable. That's the game. They hurt you, then point at the blood like you're the mess. They forget who lit the match, but always blame you for the fire. But not anymore. Not this time. Because now, you see it. Now you realize you weren't the problem. You were the mirror. You showed them what they truly were, and they couldn't handle the reflection. They called you dramatic, but you were drowning. They called you broken, but you were bleeding from the wounds they gave you. They called you dangerous, and now they're right. Because you're no longer explaining. You're no longer begging. You're no longer trying to be understood by people who never care to listen. You are the aftermath of every lie, the storm that silence built, the chaos that kindness tried to cage. And now, you are done bleeding. Now, they will learn that. When you take someone's heart and blame them for the blood, eventually, they stop bleeding and start burning. Let them run. Let them hide. Let them lie to themselves. But remember this, you survived them. You rose from the ruin. And now, the one they tried to destroy is the one they'll never forget. Because the next time they see your name, They won't remember the victim, they'll remember the fire. They always talk about the loud ones, the ones who shout, who demand, who never shut up long enough to think. They confuse noise with strength, volume with truth, arrogance with confidence. But me, I was silent, not because I had nothing to say, but because I was watching, because I was calculating, because real power never needs to beg to be seen. They called me shy, timid, soft. They laughed at the way I stood in the background, but they never asked why I stayed there. They never noticed the fire I kept buried behind my eyes. You see, quiet doesn't mean harmless, and silence is a weapon you never saw coming. While they screamed for attention, I was sharpening my mind. While they craved applause, I was building a storm inside my chest. While they tried to impress the world, I was becoming the one it would never forget. Let them mock what they don't understand. Let them misread the stillness as weakness. Because now they'll learn the hard way that the quiet one was never weak. I don't need to raise my voice to crush them. I don't need to explain myself to people who only hear what they want to believe. My silence is not surrender. It is strategy. It is survival. It is war disguised as calm. I let them talk. I let them boast. I let them write their stories about me in their minds. But now it's my turn, not to scream but to rise, not to prove but to conquer, because the loudest one in the room is usually the most afraid. And the one you overlooked, that's the one who will bury you. So laugh while you can. Underestimate me while it's safe, because when the storm comes, it won't announce itself. It'll arrive in silence, just like I did. And by the time you hear it, it'll be too late. The quiet one was never weak. You just never paid attention. They thought loud meant powerful. They thought the ones who shouted the most stood the tallest. But I watched them. Watched them raise their voices to hide how small they felt. Watched them flood the room with noise so no one could hear the truth. They needed applause to feel real. I never did. I was quiet, but I was never soft. They missed that part because they only look for fire when it's raging. They forget sometimes the most dangerous flame is the one that burns silently. You don't have to scream to shake the world. You don't have to bleed out in public to prove you were wounded. I bled in silence. I broke in shadows, and I rebuilt without a sound. That's the kind of strength they never learn to see, because their eyes only follow the spotlight. Their ears only perk when the room erupts. But real power, it moves beneath the surface. It doesn't beg to be seen. It doesn't explain itself. They never noticed the way I held everything together while they tore everything apart. They never noticed the weight I carried, because I never let it show. But don't mistake my stillness for surrender. Don't mistake my calm for weakness. Still water runs deep, and when it turns, it drowns everything in its path. I wasn't loud. I was watching. I was learning. I was becoming. Let them laugh. Let them talk. Let them bask in their noise. Because when the silence finally speaks, it ends things. I didn't come to echo their volume. I came to outlast it. I came to stand when their noise dies down and their masks fall off, and when the dust settles. It won't be their shouting that's remembered. It'll be the one who never needed to raise their voice to command the storm. Real doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like me. Unmoved, unbothered, unbreakable. They thought walking away meant winning, like their absence would leave me hollow, like their silence would echo louder than my voice ever could. But here's the truth: when they left, they took nothing of value, because they never gave anything worth keeping. They took the noise, the lies, the weight I carried just to make them feel lighter, and I let them. I watched them leave with their illusions, their vanity, their fragile pride, and still, I did not chase, not because I was numb, but because I finally understood. You don't grieve the loss of dead weight. You let it fall. You let it rot. They thought they were irreplaceable. But how do you replace something you never truly had? They weren't my peace. They were my poison. And when poison leaves the body, it doesn't hurt. It heals. So let them leave. Let them vanish. Let them disappear into the shadows they came from. Because they took nothing from me. Not my strength. Not my fire. Not my soul. They only took their reflection, that hollow image I kept polishing, hoping it would someday feel real. But it was always glass, always fragile, always fake. They called me cold, but I was just done burning myself to keep them warm. They called me distant, but I was only building space to finally breathe. And now I see them for what they were. Noise, distraction, delay. I was never theirs. They were never mine. We were a lie I kept telling myself to feel less alone. But now I walk alone by choice, not in pain. In power. Because when they left, they took nothing of value. And I found everything they tried to bury, right here inside me. So let them whisper. Let them wonder. Let them regret. I don't need apologies. I don't need closure. I don't need them. They took nothing. I lost nothing. But I became everything they'll never be. And that is the real victory. They called you a mistake. But you were the warning they begged for in silence. You were the mirror they smashed because they couldn't stand their reflection. You weren't too much. You were too real. And that scared them more than any lie they'd ever told. They didn't want truth. They wanted comfort. They wanted someone who'd smile while bleeding so they wouldn't have to feel guilty for the cut. But you bled and you screamed. And in that scream was the lesson. A lesson wrapped in loyalty. A lesson built from scars. A lesson that said, this is what it looks like when someone loves for real. But they weren't ready. No, they weren't ready to be held accountable. To see the wreckage they left behind. To feel the weight of your silence after they laughed at your voice. So they called you toxic, too intense, too emotional, too hard to love. But that wasn't your failure. That was their fear. They feared someone who wouldn't play pretend, who wouldn't shrink just to fit into their hollow world. They wanted obedience. You brought truth. They wanted applause. You brought a mirror. You were the test. They failed. You were the warning. They ignored it. And now they sit in circles, filled with people who look like them, plastic, shallow, soft-spoken puppets. And still, they wonder why nothing feels real. You were the pulse. You were the heartbeat they needed. But they chose the silence. Let them lie to themselves. Let them rewrite the story. Let them bury your name under their shame. Because deep down, they remember. They remember your eyes that saw through them, your words that sliced through their masks, your love that burned when theirs was hollow. They remember, and it haunts them, not because you were cruel, but because you were right. You were the lesson they refused to learn, the truth they didn't want, the mirror they shattered, the voice they silenced. But you didn't disappear. You evolved, and now, you are the silence they fear, the ghost they can't outrun, the name they don't speak but can't forget. So let them suffer in circles. Let them fumble through shadows. Let them ache in the absence of what they once called too much. Because you were never too much. You were exactly enough, and they were just too little to hold you. You were the lesson. And now you teach through absence. Now you echo without speaking. Now your silence screams louder than your love ever did. And they hear it. Every day, every night. They hear it, and they know. They know what they lost. They know you were the lesson. And they just refused to learn. They thought you'd always be there, silent, soft, safe. They thought you were a fixture, a background presence, reliable, forgettable, replaceable. You were the shoulder they leaned on, the voice they ignored, the heart they drained. And then you vanished. No goodbye, no closure, no final scream to satisfy their ego. Just silence, cold, clean, unforgiving silence. And suddenly, the world they built on your back started to collapse. Because they never realized you weren't a background character in their story. You were the spine, the structure, the storm holding back a greater storm. They mocked your presence. until your absence roared louder than your loyalty ever did. They laughed when you loved them. Now they whisper your name in regret, afraid to speak too loud, lest your shadow hears them. They thought you were weak when you gave, but now they're starving in the famine you left behind. They thought walking over you gave them power, but now they trip over the emptiness, choke on the echo. Let them suffocate in the silence. Let them break under the weight of your absence. Let them finally feel the pain they swore you were making up. Because this time, you didn't yell, you didn't beg, you didn't explain, you just vanished. And with you went the last of their peace. They thought they were fine without you. Let them prove it. Let them try to build without your loyalty. Let them try to shine without your reflection. Let them try to breathe in the space you used to fill. And when they lie awake at night, eyes wide, hearts racing, drenched in the quiet they once demanded, let that silence remind them you were never noise, you were never chaos, you were never the burden, you were the balance. And now they're drowning in the collapse, alone, lost, shattered because the day you disappeared, their world cracked, and it's never going to heal. Let them live with what they lost. I won't scream. I won't beg. I won't explain myself to those who never cared to understand. Let them sit with the silence I left behind. Let them choke on the void they created with their own hands. They thought I was replaceable, forgettable, expendable, but they were wrong. So gloriously wrong. I won't ruin them. That's too easy. That's too loud. No. I'll let absence do what my rage never could. I'll let regret grow in the corners of their mind until it devours everything they once believed was untouchable. They didn't just lose me. They lost loyalty they'll never find again. They lost truth, the kind that stands beside you when everything else walks away. They lost someone who would have set fire to the world just to keep them warm. And now they'll search for that fire in everyone else and never feel the heat again. Let them pretend they're fine. Let them smile through the emptiness. Let them dance in the ashes like they didn't start the fire themselves. They'll scroll through memories and swear they don't miss me. But at 2 a.m., when silence is loud and truth can't be drowned out by noise, they'll remember. They'll remember who I was, what I gave, what they destroyed. And I'll be gone. I don't need revenge. I became the consequence. My presence was their privilege, and now my absence is their punishment. Let them live with what they lost, because nothing haunts a person more than the moment they realize they'll never get another chance at someone like me. Let that be the echo in every room they walk into. Let that be the weight they carry. Let that be the shadow they can't shake. I was the gift, and they dropped me. So now they live with empty hands, empty hearts, and a silence that screams louder than any goodbye. Let them live with what they lost, and let them suffer quietly, the way I did. They tried to erase you, tried to bury the truth under their lies, their noise, their carefully crafted masks. But the thing about truth, it doesn't die in silence. It sharpens. It waits. It becomes the blade. You were the one they overlooked, because you didn't play their games, because you didn't beg for crumbs or wear a plastic smile to be accepted, because you didn't shrink to fit their tiny boxes built from fear and imitation. You were the threat, not because you had power, but because you were power, unshaped, unfiltered, unbreakable. They hated that. They laughed behind your back, then stole your words and wore your strength like it was theirs. They called you too intense, too emotional, too much. But now look at them, crumbling under the weight of their own emptiness, drowning in the silence you left behind. You were the real one. And now they feel it. The shift, the absence, the cold where your fire used to be. They can't laugh now. They can't mimic now. Because the echo only works when the original is still within reach. And you're gone. Not hiding. Not broken. Ascended. You rose when they expected you to vanish. You built in shadows what they could never imagine in the light. While they were performing, you were preparing. While they were chasing applause, you were mastering silence. Now they tremble at your name. The same name they once whispered with mockery. You were never weak. They were just never strong enough to see you clearly. But now they see. Now they know. You were never the storm they expected. You were the silence before it. And now you are the storm. You were the lesson they ignored, the real they couldn't recognize, the gold they treated like rust. But gold doesn't scream to be seen. It waits. And when it shines, it blinds. Let them sit in the aftermath. Let them rewrite the story, twist the truth. Cling to what little dignity they have left. It doesn't matter anymore, because the chapter you're writing has no place for shadows who only wanted your light, but not your truth. You were the real one. And now they choke on that truth. Let them remember. Let them regret. Let them rot in the absence of what they couldn't honor. And you rise. You rebuild. You reign. Because they didn't believe in you when it mattered. And now that you've become what they never imagined, they don't matter. They never did. You were the real one. And now the world will never forget it.